be fascinated to see what this new information is that they found buried somewhere within that Hoover building, because I do think that transparency is key. And now that we have Ed Martin, who was supposed to be the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., now the president has appointed him to go after this. So I think both Kash and Dan were pretty clear. They're going to follow the facts. They're going to provide transparency. And then ultimately it's up to the Department of Justice to hold these dirty cops responsible for what they've drugged this country through for the last almost decade.
And that's the President's Advisory Board Chairman, Devin Nunes, joining me on Sunday Morning Futures Sunday about what's ahead for the agencies in charge of America's justice system. Last week, the president named Ed Martin as the DOJ's new weaponization czar. He's responsible for going after anyone who abused government power in the effort to depoliticize government. DOJ pardon attorney and weaponization czar Ed Martin joins me right now. Ed, it's great to have you this morning. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria.
So you heard my interview with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, their efforts in terms of depoliticizing. How are you going to unwind the damage done and the lost trust in the DOJ and the FBI?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. On day one, Donald Trump signed an executive order about weaponization and getting after this. On Pam Bondi, on Attorney General Bondi's first day, she gave us a memorandum laying it out, and we've already been working on it for 2 months. Kash and Dan, I worked with as U.S. Attorney. They have a hard job. They're kind of going through the internals of the FBI. It's a big, complex thing. Our job, as Devin Nunes alluded to, is to now go and follow the trail and go and find who did what and when. And, I tell people there's three things that have to happen. One is we have to figure out exactly what happened. A lot of that's hidden. A lot of it's been kind of misleading. The second thing is hold people accountable. Some of it will be prosecutorial. Some of it may be outside of the statute of limitations, but we can still publicly pronounce it. And the third thing is get some help for the people that were weaponized against. And all three of those components are what Pam Bondi has asked us to do. So we have a huge job because almost every area of American life was targeted by the Biden administration in the last 4 years. So that's the process we're going to go through, and it's maybe the most important thing I could ever be asked to help participate in.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations, because you're right. It's an incredible role, particularly with what we all just witnessed. I mean, there's been no accountability whatsoever for the Russia collusion made-up story. And, now the statute of limitations is in place. So do they just get away with it? The people who came up with this idea that Trump colluded with Russia and drove it through government, it went viral across the country. There are people today who still think that Russia and Trump have some kind of a relationship.
Well, do they get away with it? The answer is no. The question is, how do we hold them accountable? By the way, some things get outside of the statute of limitations traditionally if it's a series of acts, if it's an ongoing series of acts, if it's what's called RICO. There's ways to sort of get past that. But we have to go find out. And I think there will be accountability. There may be accountability that we don't see yet. We may have to find out. Sometimes people are making money off of the process, and we can go after that. There's a lot to do. But the first thing is get all the way to the bottom of it and be public about it. Maria, you mentioned many people in this country are victims of what I call the hoaxes that capture our imagination because the media spends so much time. The Unselect Committee of Liz Cheney, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars with earned media to condition people to think something about January 6th that we now know was not true. So we have to unpack that, unravel it, and it's going to take less time than maybe trials would. That's one of my fears is sometimes, prosecutions will take years. We have to go faster than that in terms of the public and then still have the trials and prosecutions.
I mean, didn't they destroy evidence? Liz Cheney and her colleagues destroyed evidence. How did they get away with destroying evidence? And then they made the people think that one narrative was underway when it was a completely different narrative. I mean, Kash Patel told me that to make sure I understand the difference between FBI agents and sources to the FBI, because they suggested that there were sources wearing plain clothes in the crowds January 6th, egging people on.
Yeah, first of all, on the destruction of evidence, that's, again, an example of something where we can maybe pull forward if we can find the evidence of that. And also, one thing that we can also do, it's related to the other position I have, is we can give immunity to people to come and tell the truth. There are people that were participating in, for example, the COVID era and what was going on. Some of those people may have liability themselves and they're players, minor players. Well, it's very much in the tradition to say, hey, we're going to give you immunity so you can come in and tell the whole truth about what's gone on. I had a whistleblower in my office talking about some of these things about 10 days ago, exactly in this line. We've got to, as the Department of Justice and the Weaponization Committee, go and get that and get all that information, give people a chance to tell the truth so we can get to the next step.
All right, I want to move on to pardons because I know you are putting some new scrutiny on some of the pardons that Joe Biden put in place toward the end of his term. I just got a text from someone and he said to me, the question is, was Joe Biden getting radiation cancer treatment while he was in the White House? Or were they foregoing it so that he wouldn't be wiped out and looked even worse than he was? I mean, of course, these treatments are very aggressive and they do wipe people out. But some of the pardons that President Biden put in place, I mean, literally some of them he did 20 minutes before President Trump was inaugurated. His son, Hunter Biden, was pardoned. Other high-ranking officials involved in the January 6th committee. Now that we know that Joe Biden was sick, and he may have been sick while he was president, and they were hiding it from us, what do you want to say about these pardons? Are they legitimate?
Well, here's the way this goes, Maria. When something happens so unprecedented, which is what the Biden pardons are something we've never seen in history. There's never been the length back in time, the breadth, as you mentioned, the speed with which they were done. And so a lot of things, if you're a prosecutor, you say, what's going on here? But put it for simply, I've been watching you for years, Maria, and following you. And here, like a business deal. If I try to sell you a piece of real estate and I lie to you about it, you can get your money back from me and maybe I can go to jail for fraud. If I'm an agent for someone else and I engineer a deal and that turns out to be fraudulent, there's a lot of questions. It looks a lot like Joe Biden didn't know what he was doing. It looks that way. We don't know yet. We need to know who was engineering the pardons. What were they engineering it for? Were they getting paid for it? Were they doing it to cover up their own crimes? I mean, if you look closely at what the pardons were and when they happened, there's a lot of questions that clearly are present. And remember, the auto pen now, if you use that tool to engineer this, auto pens are legal. That's been established. But they're not legal if the guy who you're doing it on behalf is not competent to do the deal. So this is basic sort of contract law and business, and the country deserves. We've had the pardon power since the very beginning of the country. It was at the beginning because we wanted our executive to have that power. We have to protect it. And right now we're seeing a fraud on the American people. Well, perhaps a fraud on the American people because of what the Biden pardons did. And we need to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I mean, it's true. It's incredible because, you know, we just saw the Robert Hur tapes, and the tapes show it all. And right after the Hur tapes were released, they come up and they take it out of the closet, the prostate cancer. I'm just wondering, you know, I mean, and you know, you don't want to ask these questions in the middle of such a hard time because, you know, we all pray that he's okay. But at the same time, these are national security issues. And so do you believe that someone else was running things? I mean, that's elder abuse. You're talking about this auto pen. Is that not elder abuse?
Well, my wife is a geriatrics physician, actually. She can tell you about elder abuse. I agree with you. But I don't need to get to there. I just would say I had a whistleblower in the office, my office, as U.S. attorney, who told me all about who was really running things in the White House. And they were even saying, again, it's just the beginning of a whistleblower. They were saying exactly, you know, who was benefiting from control and access. There's a lot of questions that have to be asked. And, you know, I'm sorry about cancer diagnosis and all that, but I have to tell you, as an attorney, as someone who's seen this, there were people in jail during January 6th. There were people that being persecuted after in the Russia hoax, whose lives were turned upside down. The truth deserves to be known, and people that did this deserve to be held accountable, and that's what we have to do. And on weaponization means you hide from people the true reason you're doing it. We're not hiding. Joe Biden is not a target because of who he was. It's the conduct, and that's what Donald Trump told us and Pam Bondi told us in the weaponization group, and we're being transparent about why we're moving ahead. I think the American people deserve it.
Yeah, but it's also the fact that it's never ending. Like, for example, one point that I keep making is the judge that gave a smack on the wrist to Kevin Kleinsmith. That's the FBI agent. He was a young agent, you know, but he lied. You know, he said, no, Carter Page was not an asset of the CIA, which, in fact, he was. He was working with the CIA to get information on the Russians, and the FBI targeted him and, you know, wanting to know why he's talking to Russians. And Carter said, I'm talking to Russians because I'm working with the CIA. And then Kevin Kleinsmith writes, no, he was not an asset. So what happens? The judge just smacks him on the wrist and says, you get community service. That judge is the same judge that's trying to stop President Trump today with the immigration plan, Judge Boasberg. And then there's Adam Schiff, who went on every show on TV in 2017 and 28 and told us that Russia collusion was in plain sight. Any accountability there? No, he's a senator.
Well, and to your point, though, you say it goes back to the same things. What you start to realize is there's about a dozen people that seem to be at the center of a lot of this. You know, Brennan and Clapper and Mary McCord, Lisa Monaco. And again, what part of what must not escape accountability is to really identify and lay this out. Again, prosecute when you can. I'm for it. And by the way, civil liability when you can. I'm for it. But also get the truth out, because most of these people are lying in plain sight. You know, they're at Georgetown Law Center, and they're on the New York. Andrew Weissman is another guy. He was in the middle of the targeting of the American people from back in Enron all the way through Mueller, and then his tools were used against J6. So again, getting to the bottom of it is necessary.
And by the way, Devin Nunes said it's Mueller's team that needs to be looked at, and there could be criminality there. That's what Devin Nunes said. Look, Ed, you've got a full portfolio and a lot of work. Wow, politics is dirty, man. And there could be serious criminality here. We'll be watching your work. We so appreciate your time this morning, sir.
Thanks, Maria.
All right, Ed Martin joining us. We'll be right back. Stay with us.